Ethereum is getting a big update and it's called Dancun, or Deneb, or Cancun, or maybe Proto-Danksharding. Yeah, Ethereum tends to have pretty bad and pretty confusing marketing. Things usually make sense once you dig into the details, but for anyone who isn't a hardcore Etherean, it can be very difficult to follow. It's almost like everything has been deliberately designed to bamboozle, including things as simple as naming an update. So how did we get here? Why do Ethereum updates seem to have so many different names? As you might expect of Ethereum, most of this confusion in naming comes from something else which is, potentially, even more confusing. See, Ethereum is actually formed of two layers, the execution layer and the consensus layer. Each update to Ethereum is actually a pair of updates, one to each layer, and those updates each have their own name and follow their own naming convention. Ethereum's unusual, layered design is a result of its transition from proof of work to proof of stake. Without going into too much detail, proof of work and proof of stake are just different ways of deciding how a blockchain should be updated with a new batch of transactions. Ethereum started life as a proof of work chain, but felt that proof of stake was a better fit that would help it achieve its long-term ambitions. So, years after it launched, Ethereum took the unprecedented step of transitioning from proof of work to proof of stake. The developers decided that the simplest and safest way to accomplish this transition was to build an entirely separate blockchain that just did proof of stake. This new chain ran in parallel to the existing Ethereum blockchain, and for a long time there was very little interaction between them. Then, when everything was ready, the two chains were merged. Proof of work stopped on the existing Ethereum chain, and the new proof of stake chain effectively absorbed that old blockchain and became responsible for updating it. In this way, Ethereum became a single entity operating under proof of stake. But if you look closely, you'll see that there is still a small separation between the two elements. Where it was once two separate blockchains, it's now two separate layers. Today, the old Ethereum blockchain is known as the execution layer. This is where most of the activity happens. It's where smart contracts live and transactions take place. Meanwhile, the proof of stake chain is known as the consensus layer, and it pretty much only does proof of stake to decide which block comes next. If you want to learn more about the transition to proof of stake, then I wrote a whole bunch of pieces about it on Mirror. I'll link to that down below. As I mentioned earlier, updating Ethereum means updating both the execution layer and the consensus layer, and each of those updates has its own name and follows its own naming convention. Execution layer updates are named after cities that hosted an Ethereum conference called DevCon. The Ethereum Foundation's Alex Bergzazi suggested this naming pattern in mid-2019. He argued that it would provide an almost endless list of names, while eliminating many potential debates or squabbles about how things should be named. DevCon has been held all over the world, and its location changes each year. Previous host cities include Berlin, Osaka, and Bogota. The next one, at the time of recording, will be held in Bangkok. The most recent execution layer update was called Shanghai, which hosted DevCon 2. The next update, which will go live in March, is named Cancun after the city that hosted DevCon 3, and then we'll have Prague as it hosted DevCon 4, and so on. Consensus layer updates are named after stars and go in alphabetical order. So the first update was named after a star beginning with A, the second after a star beginning with B, and so on. Of course, the less prescriptive naming convention compared to the execution layer means that a decision is still required for each update name. After all, there are a lot of stars out there that could lend their name to each update. Generally, people will discuss names in places like the Ethereum Magicians Forum before finally deciding on a name in an all-core devs call. So far, updates have been named Altair, Bellatrix, and Capella. The update in March is called Deneb, after a star in the constellation of Cygnus, and the next update after that will be called Electra. That leaves each Ethereum update with two different names, and that might confuse people. So, to try and help the situation, Ethereans decided to simplify things by creating a third name that combined those other two. It seems that the idea to create a portmanteau to refer to the overall Ethereum upgrade was first proposed by Proto-Lambda, an Ethereum researcher now working at Optimism Labs. As the names could be combined in a variety of different ways, there is usually another round of discussion on forums and in all-core devs calls before a decision is made about what the official portmanteau should be. This has resulted in Chapella, which comes from combining the execution layer upgrade name Shanghai with the consensus layer upgrade name Capella. The next update, Dancun, is a portmanteau of Deneb from the consensus layer and Cancun from the execution layer. Then we'll have Pectra from Prague and Electra. However, because this can be difficult to pronounce properly, some people are simplifying things once again by using yet another name, Petra, like the city. So this naming system is already getting quite confusing, but there are still more complexities to throw into the mix. In addition to the 3 official names for each update, one for each layer plus the portmanteau of the two, some people refer to certain updates with different names again. For example, some people might refer to the Dancun upgrade as just Proto-Danksharding, or they might use a term like the merge when talking about another update. So what's going on there? Just as every high-level Ethereum update is actually a pair of updates rolled into one, each update is also formed of several smaller changes. These small changes are called Ethereum Improvement Proposals, or EIPs. Technically, the large-scale updates like Dancun are also EIPs, but they're a special case called a meta EIP because they are an EIP about integrating other EIPs. Dancun, for example, contains 9 different EIPs. 5 of them affect the consensus layer, and 7 affect the execution layer. EIPs have their own lifecycle and governance process that we can discuss another time. What matters here is that each of the proposals has its own specific purpose, and each is assigned a number that results in a standardized name that looks something like EIP 1234. Most of the time, nobody outside of the developer community pays much attention to these proposals, but occasionally, someone will make an improvement proposal that is particularly exciting to a large audience of Ethereans. One example would be EIP 1559, which dramatically changed Ethereum's fee market to improve both the UX and the monetary policy. Another example is EIP 4844, which is included in Dancun. In addition to gaining a mass following, some particularly exciting EIPs may be given a snappier, unofficial name as people talk about them and promote the change. For example, EIP 4844 is better known as Proto-Danksharding. These particularly exciting and much hyped EIPs often come to overshadow everything else that is included in the update with them. In fact, some people might refer to a specific EIP when talking about an overall network update. People didn't really talk about the London upgrade, for example. No, they just talked about EIP 1559, despite London including 4 other EIPs. Similarly, today, people tend to talk about Proto-Danksharding rather than Dancun. And it's not just the individual, small-scale changes that can come to lend their name to overall Ethereum updates. The stages of Ethereum's long-term, big-picture roadmap can do the same. This is where terms like the merge and the verge come from. Ethereum's founder Vitalik Buterin created a loose roadmap for the platform and updates it annually. This roadmap divides protocol changes into rough groups named the merge, the surge, the scourge, the verge, the purge, and the splurge. Collectively, they are sometimes called the urges, and Bankless recently did a lengthy episode explaining all of them. Again, the details of these changes aren't particularly important here. What matters is that certain Ethereum updates are so significant in delivering one of the urges that they may be represented by the urge name. For instance, the Paris network upgrade saw the merging of the 2 Ethereum blockchains and the transition to proof of stake discussed earlier. While it didn't complete the entire merge section of Vitalik's roadmap, it delivered the most significant part of it, and therefore, people generally used the name the merge instead of Paris when talking about this update. So, that's how Ethereum updates end up as a confusing mess with multiple different names. Each update is actually a pair of updates, one for each of Ethereum's layers. Each of those layer level changes has its own name and follows its own naming convention, and so the overall network upgrade is named by merging those two. Meanwhile, unofficial names can take hold for certain particularly exciting changes. Those names may come from individual EIPs, low-level changes that may be a small fraction of an overall update, or they can come from Ethereum's large-scale roadmap. So that's it for today. I'll be here to clear up any more Ethereum confusion in the future, and much more besides, so make sure you're subscribed to see any of that. And with that, I'll say thank you very much for watching, have a great day, and I will see you in the next video.